And we're live. All right.
And we are live.
Here we go. We're starting to get people in. Hi, Dawn. Hi, John. Hi, Paul. Hi, Douglas. Hi, Laura. See Bailey computing. We've got Christopher tuning in now. Gosh, people have been waiting on the side. We've got Ryan Lightly, Simon, Lloyd, James, Georgie, Ian. I'm sorry if I'm missing anyone out. People are literally just flooding in.
I can't keep up.
I know I can't keep up as well. If you guys are just tuning in now, if you can just press or type in a little hi in the chat just to make sure that everything's working fine on our side, I'd highly appreciate that.
Let's give a little message.
There we are. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, John. Thank you, Ian. Looks like it's going very well. Hi.
Hey, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Hope everyone's enjoying the weather wherever you're tuning in from. It's nice and sunny where we are in Newcastle, which is very, very rare.
I think it's the last day we get as well. I think the rest of the week's raining, isn't it?
Oh,
sounds about right.
Goodness me.
For the northeast.
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
It does sound about right. Who else have we got tuning in, Luce? Got Sam, Robin Grayson, Robert, Paul,
Mary,
Martin,
Lloyd, Laura,
Glenn. Right, well, it's 5 o'clock. I think we should wait another 30 seconds and then we can kick off.
Yeah, we'll give it another minute. Fun fact for everybody while you're here. So Adam actually works in the same building as us. So he is actually just above in the upstairs. So we know Adam quite well. So it's great to actually work together. So it's great having you, Adam.
Thank you.
It's good to finally have another webinar back. I know that a lot of people have been working from home recently, and we've got a lot of requests for Dev Hub to come back as a sort of physical event in Newcastle with the free pizzas and the live speakers as well, and the free beers as well.
Beers, that's what we like.
And hopefully that'll come back in the next couple of months, fingers crossed. Yeah. But for now, it's nice to connect with everyone. We've got about 40 people in now. But yeah, so I think we should kick off now. What do you think, Liz?
Yeah, we'll kick off. I mean, everybody feel free to sort of keep the chat active. Adam can see sort of all of your messages. So if you have any questions as we go through, feel free to put them in. I'm not sure, are you answering them as you go, Adam, or are you just going to answer them all at the end, or?
Whatever, I'm not bothered. As long as I'm not in flow talking about something, then I'll jump on any questions, I guess.
Awesome.
Cool.
Right.
Amazing.
Well, for everyone who's just coming now, welcome, and for everyone who's been in the DevHub community for the past year or more, welcome back. It's nice to see you again. That's what happens when you join the DevHub community. You get an extra greeting, so hopefully you guys will come back again the next time. But yeah, over to you, Liz, if you'd like to introduce them.
Yeah, so it is our pleasure to have Adam Anderson. So like I say, Adam works in the same building as us. So he's actually owns Blue Cookie, which is a family-run consultancy, which is, I think you recently just launched your new website as well, so you can have a look, find out a little bit more about the company. So I'll hand it over to you, Adam. So yeah, enjoy, everyone.
Okay, 2 seconds. Just share my screen. So is that coming through all right, my screen? Is my screen sharing all right, is it? Yeah, okay, cool. Sorry. Yeah, so as Lucy said there, my name is Adam Anderson. I'm a software developer and owner of Blue Cookie. And I have been for 8-10 years. I've been doing software development. I've had Blue Cookie for the last 5 years, nearly 6 years. So Blue Cookie, we do web development, mobile app development. When we first started, we're basically just done websites, and then we kind of progressed through and eventually got to the stage where mainly building web applications and mobile applications. So yeah, the title of this talk is all about Flutter and why it's awesome. So hopefully I can touch on points that explain why it's awesome. But yeah, it's just to go through a few things. I don't want to go too deep into it because Flutter is an extensive topic. It's an extensive framework, and it's the language that underpins it, Dart as well. That's quite extensive. So I thought I'd just touch on some main areas with Flutter, and then hopefully do some demo code as well. How that goes, we'll see. It could crash and burn, but hopefully not. So why Flutter is awesome. So first, what is Flutter? So Flutter is an open source framework that was built by Google around about 2017. And essentially it's a cross-platform application development framework that uses Dart for building native-like. They're very careful. It's like saying how your broadband speed is up to. They're very careful in saying native-like and not actually native. So native performing applications. So that means super fast, super responsive, and can work across iOS and Android. And very recently, with the last release, it's basically gone full cross-platform. So that includes web, desktop, Mac desktop, Linux desktop, and embedded devices as well. So the whole premise around Flutter is that if you've come from any of the sort of frameworks or languages or native developments or using native Android or native iOS, having the ability to just have one language and one framework means that you don't have to know a lot of things. And sort of the thing that underpins Flutter, just a minute, I think I've gone a slide too far. I'll just go back. So the bit that underpins Flutter is, just a sec. So it uses its own rendering engine. So rather than having the likes of iOS and Android and having to sort of upskill developers on knowledge across the multiple levels and things, we only have to use Flutter to build. Now we're going to start looking at building web applications in it. And we already do mobile applications. And that came around originally because we didn't even know how to build mobile apps. We originally built in web applications, and then a customer come to us with a requirement to build a mobile app. And rather than saying no, we said yes, and then kind of figured it out along the way. Now, originally we started looking at a couple of different options. Going down the route of using iOS was a no-go, and going down the route of using Android was a no-go. Although I had a little bit of knowledge in Android, it wasn't viable to learn iOS and Android time-wise, or recruiting more developers specifically for those things, as this was very, very early on. So we had the choice of a couple of different frameworks at the time when we were looking. There was a one which was a React-based one, which was React Native, which is backed by Facebook. And then there was another one called NativeScript, which was backed by, I think I can remember it was backed by, but anyways, that was underpinned by Angular, which is another Google framework that we use quite a bit. So when we started using Flutter, was because we tried all of the other frameworks and we just came up against so many obstacles in trying to implement it, and just it ended up being an absolute nightmare to use anything else. This was a while ago, so any of the frameworks that we're looking at using then, NativeScript or the Ionics or anything like that, they've probably come quite a long way, and we haven't really looked at them since. But we used Flutter essentially from beta, which is quite dangerous under normal circumstances, but we had no choice. We had to get a mobile app out of the door that we said we could deliver, and we couldn't use web technologies because of the nature of what it was, and it would have ended up being not what we promised we could deliver. So yeah, so a little bit more about Flutter and why it's awesome. So I mentioned just before that Flutter and everything's a widget, and I'm just going to gloss over most of this just to kind of do like a top level overview of it, and then when we get into the actual coding, hopefully, I'll sort of discuss some of the topics that I touch on in here and how Flutter works. So this is a little bit of a snippet of just some very, very basic Flutter code. It doesn't do a great deal other than it's a list of text. And Flutter is basically, instead of like, if you take something like HTML, you have to write loads and loads of markup, and then you then have to go and write your CSS styling, and then everything is kind of separate and it's not all in one place. Whereas Flutter takes the approach of everything is a widget, so everything that you do with regards to layout, styling, formatting, everything is sort of just inline and just as you see it. So it's not an overly exhaustive option, but example. So just everything's in line. So text styling, it's just everything's all in one place. So if I just jump across to the next slide. So Flutter is, if you come from a traditional web development background, I mean, I don't know anybody in what background everybody is, but if you come from a traditional web development background, which is kind of Flutter is a nice ease into doing mobile development if you've got web development, just because some of the syntax of Dart, the language that is used for Flutter, it's quite it has a lot of similarities to JavaScript, but strongly typed. So the way Flutter works is it's the application view is based on the state. So what you see on the screen is basically a result of the state of the application. So the opposite of that, if you have traditional web development background, then like using something, for example, using jQuery, you'd sort of have everything on page, and then you would then conditionally hide and select things based on user actions and user interactions and list rendering and all sorts. Whereas Flutter sort of inverts that. So what you see on the screen is a result of the state of your application. And again, it's very, very brief overview of which I'll kind of go in when we go into the coding aspect of it. Yeah, so why Flutter? So this is just a couple of reasons of why, and sort of like keywords and sort of the main aspects of Flutter. So one of the big draws is that it's backed by Google, which you could either look at it as good or a bad thing, depending on how you view Google. But regardless, it's backed by one of the biggest tech companies in the world. So Flutter's not going anywhere, and it's coming on leaps and bounds. So if you're coming from a web development background like what I did, then Flutter's a really nice, like slight learning curve to move into mobile and take all the things you know from web development and basically take those and sort of upskill and apply those into building mobile apps. And again, the cool thing is with Flutter sort of spreading everything out now is that with some caveats, you can take the same code that you write for your mobile app and then take that and basically produce a web app, a desktop app, and they're even do embedded apps. So sort of like smart applications and stuff. It has such a small footprint that you can deploy that on smaller devices with like low power and things. So yeah, so made by Google, which is a massive plus. That like I say, Flutter's not going anywhere. It's continually trending upwards. It's getting more stars on GitHub. It's getting more usage, and it's just going from using a lot of the other platforms and even native development. I mean, you'll never beat native iOS or Android development ever, but Flutter kind of gets you sort of 99.9% of use cases. You better use Flutter to build an absolutely amazing mobile application and web application now as well with the new releases and stuff. Yeah, so another key thing is one of the things that Flutter drives home is that it's native like performance, which I mentioned before. So they aim, although they say on the website it's 120 frames per second, they aim to hit 60 frames a second. So if anyone that doesn't know what that means in computer game terms, as long as you've got sort of 60 frames a second, then it means the interaction with the UI is nice and fluid and there's no perceivable jank is what they call it. So if you're doing an interaction which involves an animation or a transition, Flutter's goal is to make sure that they're all 60 frames above. So as far as the user's concerned, they've downloaded your app off the App Store and they're using a native app. There's nothing to indicate that this was built with Flutter. It just works as if it's a normal app. The other cool thing about Flutter with development, so is this, they have something called hot reload, which is commonplace now amongst pretty much all frameworks now, whereby, and again, this is something I'll show when we get to the coding section. So hot reload means the state of the app. You can change the UI as you're building things as you go. Because the last thing you want to do when you're building something is have to constantly refresh. So if you put some data in and you've got a nice list of users that you've put in as a test, if you then have to go and change a few bits of code and some styling and just to get things looking right, every time you make that change, the last thing you want to do is have to reload data to get a representation of what your UI is going to look like. So the whole idea of hot reload is, for the most part, again with some caveats, is that if you put some data in the app, then it'll stay there while you make changes and the UI will change around the data. But again, I can show that when I go through the coding section. So the whole cross-platform aspect of it, I mentioned that there's a caveat to it, or there's some thoughts that it's not truly cross-platform. So most people perceive cross-platform as if you can basically write one bit of code and then you don't have to do anything else. It just works all of the magic. And then just as a wave of a wand, you'll have some code works on mobile, web, desktop, embedded, Mac. Not as simple as that. And the way that kind of Flutter advocate doing it is that you have shared business logic. So as a business, that's one of the reasons why we decided to use Flutter, because of the shared business logic element to it. So we currently use a couple of different frameworks for web development. So we use Laravel. And for front-end development, we use Vue and Nuxt and kind of that tool set. But we're hoping to do a couple of tests around using Flutter's cross-platform aspect to see how much this cross-platform element of Flutter that's touted by Google is legit. And it looks cool. For all of the demos that they've done on the last release, everything looks great. So you could take the code that you write for the mobile app and deploy it as a web app, and it would look exactly the same as your mobile app, but on a desktop. The only thing you have to do as a developer or designer is then implement multiple layouts to take advantage of the different screen sizes, which you would do as a web developer anyways with responsiveness. If you use Bootstrap or whatever, you'd have responsive breakpoints to gradually show different parts of the UI. And that's kind of what the considerations you have to still make with Flutter, the same as you would do with anything else. So with the cross-platform element of it, now natively, if you were building an iOS app or an Android app, if you open up an Android app or an iOS app, they'll look like the native iOS or Android app. So there's a bit of leeway you have with Flutter. So if you open up an iOS app, there's certain expectations that you have as a user of one of the two platforms where it operates in a certain way, even just down to subtle things like the way that the screen scrolls. So if you scroll on an Android device, there's the little, like the ghosting or the halo that comes at the top when you scroll down. Whereas on iOS, you have the sort of the bounce back sort of animation where you can kind of over scroll and it bounces back. So as much as Flutter gives you the freedom to implement the UI that you want, it still has the main core elements of iOS and Android. So if you deploy it to those devices, then you're going to kind of have the iOS or Android experience, but then with a uniform branding across both devices with very, very little to no effort. There are some plugins and stuff that you can use where you can swap out native like alert boxes and things, but for the most part, it means you can deploy something that looks the same across both platforms with some of the native considerations for Android and iOS. But yeah, we'll come into some of that later. So yeah, fast dev time. So because you're kind of you're building one code base, some slight little tweaks for each of the two platforms here and there if you want to make some specific styling for each. But for the most part, you're basically writing your code once and then deploying it to two applications. So from a business perspective for us, it doesn't equal half the time because there's still some considerations to be given for doing iOS development and Android development, like setting up the app stores and doing release management and stuff like that. But as far as development goes, any business logic we develop as part of an application, it's pretty much just a one-for-one, and then the UI then makes use of that data. So development time, it's a massive time saver, and bringing new people into the business as well. It means we can bring in web devs, full stack web developers who have a good knowledge and a good concept of full stack development. Doesn't matter what the front end framework is, Vue, Vuetify, fill in the blank. And the same with the back end. Like I said, we use Laravel, but if you come from any full stack framework or tool set, you can pretty much jump into Flutter and build something like really, really quick, to the point where the application we built the first time round was me by myself, reading documentation, never used Dart at all, ever, never used Flutter before in my life. And we basically built an app, like a really good app that's actually still got the original code base from like a year and a half ago when Flutter was in beta and like 0.7, and Flutter's now in 2.2. So we've taken that app all the way from beta release of Flutter all the way through, and updates and very little sort of need to like any breaking changes or anything, and taking that all the way through to the version of Flutter that it is now, which is pretty good for any kind of framework or technology today. I do build something in a beta release of it, and then take it all the way through to the actual 2.2 release, and that app's still being fully functional with various updates throughout the last year or two. That's really good going, and it kind of goes against some of the other things that Google have done with like Android with Angular, where the Angular 1 just got kind of dropped. So, but yeah, look, there's lots of it's looking really good for that. So I guess I've kind of covered the state management aspect of it, the fact that everything, I kind of glossed over the widgets bit, but I'll go into that in a minute. Yeah, so Flutter, jumping into Flutter, if you've kind of got any C background, Java, C#, JavaScript, there's kind of like, I think Dart's kind of pooled from all of those places and like taking all the best bits of it, and it's a nice language, really, really nice language. Yeah, so I think that's about it for me, kind of just doing a round trip on that. Don't know if I've missed anything. But yeah, before I committed to doing this live code, I guess I'll probably take some questions or comments or anything before I jump into this, and cross my fingers. Okay, cool. So I can't see anything come through. I don't know if I'm looking at the right thing. Right. So.
Oh, Adam, just in the chat.
Yeah.
Not the Q&A one.
Oh, right. Sorry.
I've got a few questions there for you.
2 seconds. Just this. Being a tech guy, I think I know exactly what I'm doing, and I have no idea what to click. 2 seconds.
Happens to the best of us, Adam.
Right, so let me just minimize that. Q&A, where's the chat?
David using the Q&A, but the vast majority in the chat.
Yeah, Q&A in the chat.
Q&A. So there's one coming to Q&A while I fix this. Yeah, so David Gibbs, do you see the market picking up for Flutter developers in the UK? I think so, but the problem is I'm quite insulated from it because I'm a developer and a business owner, and it's, for me, I would rather take on, that's a tough one, because as a small business, I would prefer to have someone that can jump into Flutter. Well, for starters, because we use it, and then, like, so if you think of the idea of taking someone with existing skills and knowledge in a particular area, as in full stack developer, regardless front end development doesn't matter, regardless back end development doesn't really matter. The skills are there regardless of the languages or frameworks or technologies, doesn't matter. The underlying understanding of what that whole sort of start to finish looks like. For me, we'd have to get pretty damn big to take on a dedicated iOS developer and a dedicated Android developer. For me, that's 2 salaries for 2 developers that we can achieve by having someone that we can upskill fairly quickly. I mean, if you've had a year or two's experience doing software development, you've got a good handle on the front end, back end, building up APIs and stuff, you could walk Flutter in the sense that you could decide on something you want to build, like this thing we're going to look at as a a movie thing that I knocked up yesterday. You could take those tools and skills, read it, watch a tutorial, and build an app. That's what we've done for our first project. Like literally that. It was in panic mode where we had committed to do something, try to use all those various different frameworks and just come up to roadblocks over and over again from different limitations. And initially I was kind of reluctant to use Flutter because it didn't use native rendering. And then when you see it in action, that just went out the window. So from my perspective as a business owner, I would say Flutter is a skill set to have is very advantageous. And even if it doesn't, it's a cool thing to have on your CV as well, I guess. But I think there'll be the more popular Flutter gets, the more need for developers there'll be. And the level of upskilling to do Flutter, it's like just another tool in your sort of tool belt. But yes, I think, in short, the answer would be, yeah, I think so. That would be my opinion. Like from businesses are always looking to improve output and reduce costs. Flutter does that like tenfold, especially with the new releases and stuff, because it's now truly cross-platform, again, with some caveats. Microsoft. So I'm guessing, is that, so the Microsoft frameworks, is that Xamarin, James? Is that, because I've had some dealings with the Microsoft frameworks at the very, very beginning when we're kind of sort of analyzing which frameworks we do. And we originally started with Ionic, but Ionic's a web-based framework and that has performance limitations that we reached pretty quickly. I think that the Ionic has gone down the route of being more of a progressive web app than a sort of a hybrid. Oh God, do you use any state management libraries? Yeah, that's a good question, George. Is that George? Yes, I've been through the mill on all of them. Again, anybody watching it that's interested in this, I'll just let me put these up while they're on the screen, because there's these learning resources here. I've specifically put this guy's website on, ResoCoder. Like everything that I've learned, like beyond the normal what you'd get from just sort of reading the documentation, his website is just, it's really, really good. He's got everything for state management. But answer your question directly, all of the stuff that we do now is block. We use the block pattern and provider for some sort of more niche things. But yeah, we use the block pattern. We also use a library called Freezed. When I go through the coding example, I'll kind of show you how I originally started doing it. Because the way that I do build the apps now, the way that we build apps now using Flutter is like, we've got like a full build pipeline and we've got like automated generation of classes, which it would just be totally overboard to show you on this and it would just probably melt your brain. And it'll probably computer will probably crash as well. So, but yeah, we use block and then we use a package library called Freezed, which basically just generates all of the boilerplate for all of the classes for going from API JSON into Dart classes for doing like rendering on the UI and stuff. So Rob, in reality, do organizations need to support 3 languages, Kotlin, Swift, Dart? I don't know. I find it, like sitting here now, sort of projecting forward, I find it very difficult to find a situation where we would need to know all, where we would have someone that does all 3. There's just no need. I mean, Flutter is a framework and a technology. I mean, you can kind of, unless there's some really super niche technical requirements that you need to get access and you need to work directly with either Android or iOS, there's just no need. And even then, if you've got an application that sort of 75–80% of it doesn't need to have any like applications native specific things, then you could just build out all of that application in Flutter, and then you can write plugins that use native, like that tap into the native APIs, which is what Flutter does anyways. The way Flutter works, I mean, Google it will do a better explanation than me, but the way Flutter works is they've got their own rendering engine, which is called the Skia rendering engine, I think. So all of the UI is rendered by Flutter or by its underlying engine, and then they have all of their backend data APIs, native Dart, are basically proxy into the native APIs. So a lot of the plugins you'll find on the Dart website, on the Dart packages website, people have just built reams and reams of plugins where you can go and get, I don't know, fill in the blank plugin, like widgets or pop-up or whatever. But then anything that, like a perfect example would be like location access, so getting access to native GPS and stuff. There's plugins already built for that where all you need to know is the Dart elements of it, and then they just take care of accessing the native implementations of Kotlin or Swift, or even now, most of the plugins that people are building now, they'll be web safe, iOS, and then Android. So for instance, if you have a database, if you're having a database on Android or iOS, that's going to be SQLite, but you don't have SQLite on web. So most of the plugin providers now will swap out the implementation based on the language. So if you're doing a Flutter web build, then it'll use local storage for or the local database storage on the web. Yeah, James, I haven't seen it. Because Flutter's kind of answered all of our needs for now. I know I kind of check up on sometimes on NativeScript, which is the first one we started using like properly, like cross-platform one. But until I reach a point where Flutter doesn't satisfy business needs or customer needs, I'll probably not move away. We've kind of got what core business tool set, like I say, Laravel for backend, or .NET if it's ASP.NET, Core if it's Microsoft, and then front-end development is pretty much exclusively in Vue.js or any sort of subsidiaries of that, like Nuxt. We use Nuxt as like a wrapper around Vue. And then if there's anything where there's not a lot of UI work and it's just material design or very little UI work, then we'll use Vuetify, which is a sort of a UI library that sits on top of Vue. Any more questions before I commit to trying to do this live code and hopefully everything goes all right?
You've got a few more in the chat,
right.
the chat, Adam.
So
along the bottom for you.
Right. Chat. Where the hell's the chat? Ah, there we go. Sorry, there we go. I'm being completely silly. Right, where do I start? Do I go from that? It's only fair to start at the top, right? So I go. Do we get certification for this? I don't know. I know Google do have their own kind of certifications for lots of things. I know you can do, like you can get Android certified and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I'll have to check. That's a good question. I don't know. I guess as a recruitment thing for me, so just going into sort of recruitment mode is like really for recruiting someone into a particular, like sort of using a particular language or seeing if that person's kind of got that desire to do it. It's work. I mean, the easiest thing to do is knock up a couple of projects that you kind of can then put on Git and show. So if you don't have like how I got my first job, I didn't have any, I didn't even have any degree at that point of going for the job. I just knew I had enough in the sort of demonstrable work where I kind of catalogued a portfolio of like 2 or 3 big projects that I'd worked on personally in one of the other jobs that I'd had. So for me, I don't know if would certification do it? Yeah, I mean, if there is a Flutter certification, someone come in for it, I'd be like, well, you'd have what person with certification, but then that person had certification, but then the other person didn't, but had proof of their work or could talk about their work and explain it and show him, then you'd probably favor the one that can kind of demonstrate and talk about the work. But I don't know. I'm gonna have a look at the certification thing. What's the Flutter job market like? So that's, yeah, again, just it's kind of similar to the other one. I'm not sure because I'm not trying to get a job as a Flutter developer. We're using Flutter internally, so I don't know. I should probably check. I know that after speaking with the guys at Ronald James, I know they do place some Flutter devs. They'd probably be able to talk better to that than me, maybe. Next one, why not native? So again, I think Ryan Finch. So just time. So I think I mentioned it before. Time, like the idea of me upskilling, because again, we're very small teams. So the idea of one of us upskilling to do native. If you decide to go native, it's not just Android. Because if you're dealing with an app, like most of the apps we do are business internal apps. You can't guarantee what the customer's employees have, and they're not going to start dishing out mobile phones, so they can't control what platform the users are on. So from a business perspective, us promoting or pitching the idea of doing 2 native apps, one, it's a harder sell to the end user or the end customer, because they're like, you have to, right, we're going to build your app and it's going to be twice, you're going to pay twice for it. And to me, that is if I was the customer, it's a hard sell. It's good to give the option, but if you go to most business owners, you can go, I can deliver you everything you want, but it's not going to be native. The first question they're going to ask is what's native. They don't care. Like in my experience, customers care about the output. They don't care about what's in the black box. They care about the deliverables and whether you're going to deliver them and whether you're going to make good on the promises that you've made up front. So can we build your mobile app? Yes. That's it. So for us, I think, I just don't see a situation where we'd need to go native. Flutter gives you native-like performance, which is 60 frames a second. There's only a couple of scenarios where we've had to check little things, like when loading really, really big lists and just having to be mindful of performance, but nothing. Flutter, if you took 2 mobile apps, one built natively and one built in Flutter, give it to the end user, they're not going to know. They'll never know, ever. And the cool thing with Flutter, which I don't think I mentioned before, is as it gets compiled down in the basically binary. So there's no sort of interpolation between things. It's actually an installable that goes. It just gets down to the lowest level. Whereas some of the other frameworks, like I don't know if this is still true, but NativeScript at the time, React Native, there's a bridge between taking what you build, React Native and NativeScript, anything where you're building in HTML, there's a conversion process to take it from HTML to the native sort of implementation, so XML for Android. Flutter doesn't have that. You kind of cut out that bridge, and the only bridge you're dealing with is the sort of the proxy in between Flutter and the native APIs. And again, with most scenarios, you're just not going to reach the upper limit of Flutter unless you're doing something super duper niche, where you're having to write down at the native level. In which case, go native. But yeah, if we start building apps like that, then we'll get native developers in. But for now, Flutter's now and for the foreseeable. But I'll check on the Microsoft stuff, because the last time I checked on Microsoft was when they were doing like the web form type implementation and a few other bits. State management. So what else is there? Mobile contractor. I say loads of React Native work, but I much prefer to be developing in Flutter. Won't be long. Yeah. So to be honest, I haven't used React Native. I've used a little bit of React, and I personally don't like it, which is why we use Vue. Otherwise, it would be Angular. But yeah, I know Android. I do Android development, but just it's either learn Android or bring an iOS developer in, or I learn iOS or upskill one of the other members of the team. And we already know how to do web development, which is essentially transferable over to Flutter with like a very, very slow, like a very, very quick uptake on the way Flutter does things. Even to the point where on Flutter's website, if you go on Flutter's website, they've got like a section dedicated for each other discipline. So there's a section that's Flutter for web devs, Flutter for Xamarin, Flutter for React Native. So they've kind of got points. So if you go on the website, they've got the bits there, so you can kind of see where the similarities and overlaps go. Because like I say, there's a bit of a jump coming from web development where you're having to write your CSS and your markup is completely separate. Well, like I say, with Flutter, as we'll see in a minute when I get to the end of these questions, is everything's in line, so you can see where everything is. But yeah, I like Flutter. Otherwise, I'll be doing a React Native talk or something else. But yeah, you'd have to be, unless you can send us a compelling argument to do native and not Flutter, it's going to be Flutter because it's awesome. Yeah, there's someone saying there's no certification for Flutter yet. But yeah, I mean, if you don't have any Flutter background and you want to get a Flutter job, all you really need is good web development background, and then just have it like start messing on with Flutter. It's really easy to pick up. The only things you need, I should have probably put them on the slides, is either, again, this will be a debate between anybody that is already doing Flutter development. You can either use VS Code or Android Studio. I personally prefer Android Studio, but it sometimes gets a little bit clunky because it's quite resource heavy. But VS Code's cool. They're both just, they're good IDEs to use. So these are either one of those two. If you're going to do Android development, then you're cool just doing Windows. If you're going to do Android and iOS development, you're going to need a Mac. There are tools online where you can build everything on the cloud and have, you don't necessarily have to have the Mac, but I'm on a Mac now, even though it sucks. But it means on the Mac, I can do cross-platform builds between iOS and Android. So I can have an Android phone hooked up and an iOS phone hooked up, and I can basically see what they look like on the devices while I'm building it. And because of the hot reloading and stuff, it refreshes straight away. Yeah, so I'm going to jump into this, and then I've got the Q&A in the chat open. So if anybody puts anything in, I'll jump on it. So I'm going to be jumping. I'll cover a little bit of the state management. I'm going to attempt to I've already pre-built this movie lookup app, so I'm just going to bring over bits of that as we go. But yeah, any questions, just jump in. And there'll be very simple state management. Nothing too complicated, I hope. So I'll just explain how the way I'm doing it, just to make it because you can use a built-in emulator on Mac, but it's really, really, really slow. So all I'm doing here is I've got my computer connected up to my phone, which is just running the template app, and then I'm just casting that to my screen, just because it's a little bit better performance-wise. So we'll just minimize that. So this is basically the project. So as soon as you go to new Flutter project, this is essentially what you get. This is out of the box. So I just get a shot of all these comments, and I'll kind of just touch on the main bits as I go. So I just get rid of all these silly comments. Yeah, let's say that's going to do. So I'll just cover just quickly the main bits of it. So if anybody's had any non-web development, so null safety, not yet, and I've intentionally done it because we've got that app I was talking about before, the one that was taken all the way from 0.7 whatever, that still needs to be upgraded to null safety. So on the Mac, I'm running the latest version of Flutter before null safety, because doing the migration is going to be a bit of a pain in the ass. But yeah, all of the new apps are using the latest version, so null safety will be a yes. But I know that they've got it again because Flutter's trying to keep on top of everything and make sure upgrading is easy, and the fact that you have an app going back through a 0.7 version. They've got like an upgrade tool, haven't they? So you can run the upgrade tool and it'll tell you where all of the things that need to be upgraded to make it null safe. But also there's a couple of plugins. I think it might be one of the map plugins or something that we use on the app that I was referring to. One of their packages hasn't been upgraded to null safety, so it's kind of off until then. Not a big deal, but it's a good addition, good change. So again, if anybody's used Java or any sort of compiled application, you'll always have like a main entry point, and Flutter is no different. So essentially Flutter's main entry point is just main, and then it will run the app, and that kind of gives you this. So all Flutter apps have a main sort of starting point. In this case, it's just the main app. And this is just all running off the material design specification from Google. So just to quickly demonstrate the hot reload bit. So currently the theme's blue, and say we want to go to green. So all I have to do is hit save there, and then that will refresh. So that's the kind of the hot reload aspect of it. Haven't had to reboot anything. The only thing that gets a little bit of a pain in the ass is that if you're building a really big complex app and there's loads of UI, the initial build time is quite high. It can take like, I don't know, like this took to start this and to run it. The initial build's like 45 seconds a minute, but then every subsequent change after that is, like I say, that like saying that's immediate. So we'll go back to blue for blue cookie. That's why it's blue, not blue. So if we flip back, so again, hot reload just kicking in. So again, if we've got the Flutter demo, if we'll just change this to dev hub, and then it'll refresh on save. Yeah, so this is it. So this is an instance where the hot reloading won't pull it in, and the reason being is I'll get in on a second. I forgot about that. So it's the state management. So because the state's already been set in the app, that doesn't know that the state's changed. So if we go to the counter, anyways, so basically we've got the main app entry point is up there, which kicks off this initial app. So we've got the main home page, which is this. And then this is the state management aspect of it. So if we'll get rid of this just for now, just so I can show you. So I'll comment this out. And then if I just increase the counter. So all that's happening on this bit is if we scroll down here, this is again the widget. There's no styling, no CSS. I think you might be right. I'll come back to that in a second. So no styling, so all of the widgets basically describe the layout. So all root apps have a scaffold, which is just essentially just the outer wrapper of the application, and then everything that sits in. And so the scaffold will have certain properties that you can set. So background color, if you want to change the background color, and you've got a colors, and it's American spelling. So you basically got the full material design color scheme. So if I wanted to change the background to I don't know, gray, again, so that's reacting fine there. But also the cool thing is you can have dark mode and light mode off it as well. So if we jump into the theme data, and then there's a brightness. So normally you'll see on most apps now they'll have the consideration for being light and dark, and they'll normally have it based off the system state. So if you build like a really complicated app, or your customers paying you more money and they want a light and dark version, then you could write something that kind of could toggle between it or detect the platform state and then set it up. So bright. So jump into brightness. So we're currently, the default's light, so we'll just update that. Not going to change anything except get rid of that color. But then if we change to dark and then save that, it's just going to update it to like be the inverse. So normally what I'll see on some apps, you'll go into like a setting area and you'll change it to be light mode or dark mode, or default, which will take the platform, what it's already set at. And you can get access to, again, I'm not going to go into it, but you can get access to like the native platform state. So you could actually find out what the platform color already is. So you could already find out if someone's in light mode or dark mode. Okay, so moving on, we'll just turn this back to light. Again, it's just going to refresh straight away. So the scaffold of the app, you can have a floating app button, you can change the orientation, you can change the direction, you can set it in the middle, and there's just loads of, again, with it being all widget based and with Dart being strongly typed, you'll get type hinting on all of the things that you can access within a widget. And all the widget is just a class. It has properties, it has methods, it has functions, it has things that you can access, which makes it really good. So imagine doing this with JavaScript. I mean, you do get type hinting with JavaScript if you use like TypeScript or anything like that. but this is, you're working on a strongly typed language, which means if you mistype something, your app is not going to work, which is the benefit of using something like Dart or a C# or a strongly typed language. I'm not going to press save because it will destroy this. But this won't run. You'll know that it won't run. So the beauty of a strongly typed language and Dart in this case, the only issues you're going to have are logical issues. So you're not going to accidentally deploy this app to the App Store with that, because you won't be able to build the app. So we'll go back. So basically what's happening here for the state management side, this is the most simplest version of state management. Someone mentioned before, do we use block or what other state management? There's various ways to manage state within Flutter. This is the simplest, and it's arguably the one that you should use the absolute least, because you kind of, if you think of like a tree, you kind of want your state to sit at the very top level, so all your widgets and everything that needs access to it can have access. Whether you start putting state down the tree on this button, and this button needs to update your shopping cart and then update its value, you've got to go all the way up the tree. So that's the best way to think about each of these widgets represents a tree. So I think if I actually pop out the inspector. So all this is doing is just giving a tree, like a hierarchical view of the app. So you can see the material app. So you can see the home page, you can see the scaffold, and it just goes down and branches out, and everything, like I say, everything's a widget. And it just basically goes down like that. So say for argument's sake, if you were down this, as this text button, so say we're down this one, which is the counter, just here. If we needed to have access to that counter value at the top, say we needed to represent the count here and also the count there, it'd be no good having the state buried into that section. It's better to bring the state up and then access it across multiple widgets. But that's a super complicated topic to go into just for a general thing like this, but it's worth reading up on it. I'll put the links back up at the end. Okay, so ideally what will happen is when we click the button is it will increment the count by 1. So we'll check the logic. When the button is clicked on press, we're going to increase the state, but it won't work this at the minute. And I'll explain why. Probably everybody's guessed already because I've done remove the set state. So if I click, I'm trying to click on the video of the recorded thing, a schoolboy error. So if I click the plus button, absolutely nothing working. So it's calling the function, but we haven't told Flutter there's a state change yet. So it does nothing. This value is incremented, but Flutter doesn't know that it's changed, which is where this is, like I said, the most basic version of state management with Flutter. So if I uncomment that, save that. So again, because the state's been saved, so technically that counter value has already been incremented by 1. It's just we didn't tell Flutter that the state has changed. So we'll go back to the beginning when I think I kind of glossed over quite a bit very quickly, is that Flutter's UI is based on the application's state. So this button, this number isn't being changed here. The text isn't being changed by Flutter. It's being painted by that change, if that makes sense. So that counter, that text there is a representation of that, not the other way around. Which again, it's something to say if you're doing web development, if most of your web developers and you're using jQuery, this would be a div. It would have an ID. This would be a button. You'd have an on-click event on it. It's kind of similar to something like that, I guess, but it would be get button, on click, then get element by ID, and then change the internal value of it or the internal HTML. Whereas with Flutter, you're updating the state, and then the UI is re-rendering itself based on the state that you've set everything on there. So yeah, that's probably the simplest one. And the next bit to do is to build out this movie app, which is not super complicated. I hope it's like small enough to quickly whiz through. And I kind of hope it works. If it doesn't, then at least we've done this. If it does work, then I'll get bonus points or something, I think. Yeah, so before I move on to do that, is there any questions on that? Anything I haven't explained or anything? Hopefully I'm doing enough to convince you to start using it. That's the That's the idea. I'll take that as a note. Cool. Cheers, David. Right. Okay. So fingers crossed that this all works fine. So all I'm doing, just so I'm totally transparent and I'm not being it, is that I've already built this, and when I'm finished this, I'll get Lucy or one of the guys from Ronald James to share the link, or I'll share it tomorrow. I'm going to stick the code that I do for the movie app up on GitHub, and I'll share the link. I'll make it public. I might do some additional stuff. I mean, I think there's some mention about the different state management. Maybe I'll do that later and update it. Who knows if I get time. But everything that I do here in some way or form, I've already done just for the sake of saving time. And then I'll put it up sometime tomorrow, and I'll push out a message or something on LinkedIn. Right. So get rid of this, and then if we just leave. So the website that I'm using, I was trying to think of something to do that would be semi-interesting and not boring. And so what I'm gonna do is basically use this database service or API service. So the movie database website, they've got a free API. So if you want to use it or mess on with it, it's really cool. They put a lot of effort into it. I noticed it a while ago, and it's given us a chance to use it. So I've already joined up for this. I've already got an API key, and they expose a whole load of API endpoints for getting favorite movies, top rated movies. It's like essentially an open source version of IMDb. So it was the only thing I think that was relatively straightforward to build, and hopefully look half decent. Right, so just bear with us just a minute. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the title, which means I'm going to rebuild. Right. So I'm just going to pull in. So rather than call this home page, we're going to change it to the latest movie page. Actually, we'll just keep this home page just for quickness. So the way this is going to work is this API basically pulls in, I think it's 25 top rated movies at a time. So there's some pagination on the data, which I'll quickly show you here. So if you haven't used this before, this is Postman, and this just lets you hit API endpoints and get JSON in return. And I'll show you a little trick that I'd used when I first started doing Flutter to kind of get these into Dart classes. So this is the result of the API. Now, if you're dealing with a really small API and the data you're dealing with is small and the properties are relatively small, then I still wouldn't hand code it, but we could. So all I'd do for this is just to quickly get a Dart class out of it, is copy and paste it into this online tool, which converts them into Dart classes. So you don't have to do this, but otherwise you're dealing with like nested string access and properties and stuff, which is never a good idea. So if I take a copy of this and then I stick it in this online tool, because the idea is we're going to be pulling JSON in from the API, turn it into Dart classes so that we can then loop over it and then render a nice little list of movies out. So if I paste this in, it's going to give with the Dart class, and then there's a conversion. Yeah, so imagine having to write all this by hand. You need all of this really code-wise to go from JSON data to Dart classes. So your option is either A, write it by hand, B, use this, or C, there's another option using a package called Freeze, which will do a lot of the heavy lifting and JSON conversion and stuff, but Google it. So I've already got this done. So this is just pasting in the JSON data. This is going to give us a Dart class representation of all of the properties that I'm going to have access to on the model, which is everything that I need. So get rid of that for now, get rid of that. So if I create a new folder in here, say the Mac's starting to go slow. So models, and one I prepared earlier. If I stick this here. So again, just to show that's just exactly that, everything that comes from there. So the bit we're interested in is the from JSON encoding, and it just gets rid of a load of boilerplate. If you're building a big application and you're dealing with 10 classes, 20 classes, 30 classes, or you're building up your application every time, imagine having to go in and write all of this by hand for every single class. It's just not worth it. Not worth it at all. And the only addition I've put on here is just a computed field. And the reason being is that the poster path that these give you back from the API doesn't give you the full path. But in their documentation, it explains that you need to have this. And all this URL does is just going to put a getter on, which is just going to return like a concatenation of these two, which is basically the URL of the image. And then it's just a small image, like the way their API works for the images, it gives you a little bit of leeway in deciding on the image resolution. And like with web development, the last thing you want to be doing is loading images that are like 1 meg, 2 meg a piece, and you're having a list of, I don't know, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 items. Because if we go back to when I was talking about the 60 frames a second, it's 60 frames a second as long as you don't try and do too much ridiculous stuff, which would happen on native as well. So I learned this the hard way on another project that we're doing, pulling in, letting big images go in to the tune of 1 and 2 meg image size, and when we're loading in a list of images, it was just going really, really slow because every image was having to be rendered in and painted in Flutter, which is, so yeah, try and keep them images small. So I think this will come in at like, 100 kilobytes-ish. So that's the only addition I've made to that. So that's the class in. So we start building out this UI. And I'll try and go along the way I would normally do it, which is I'll normally take an API endpoint, which is this, and then I'll get me class that I need. But normally before I even start doing that is I'll flesh out the UI just with some placeholder data. Now, the way that we do that is if I just grab. So going to get rid of a few things in here because I don't like that header. So we'll kill the header. Which will get rid of that. And then there's this cool thing which is good for development if you're doing putting out apps for dev and testing. If you see the flag at the top, it's very annoying during development, so I always remove it. Now I don't know if I'll need to rebuild for this. Let's find out. No, it goes. So that just gets rid of that debug banner. But it's good if you're doing, like if you're having different development flavors. So, or for argument's sake, if you have a dev version of the app and then a prod version of the app, so production version, you can actually change what's in that banner. So if you've got the same way you would do with the, like web development and deployment, you'd have a staging server, a development server, a UAT server. You can actually do the same with the Flutter app and have that banner be a different representation of a different build of the app. So it's handy, but not for this, it just gets in the way. Okay, so a couple of things we need to stick at the top. We get rid of this title, don't need that. Which means we can get rid of it from there. Again, so with a strong typing, it's telling us that I don't need that anymore. I've declared something that should be there and it's not, so get rid of it. We don't need the counter, we don't need this. And then we don't need any, we'll keep that for now. So get rid of the button. So it should get a completely blank canvas. Okay, so there's a couple of properties we need. So essentially what we're doing is, because this movie API database list is really long, I think there's, how many records is there? I think there's about 100,000 or something, 1,000 lots of 25. total pages, total results. So someone else do the math. There's lots of data in there. So we don't, absolutely under no circumstances, don't want to be loading any more than sort of 25, 50 records. And I think by default, they do 25. So what we're going to do is kind of split the page in to the point where there's the app will scroll down to this section here, and then it'll request the next 25. So it's low enough to the point where a user scrolling through relatively slowly will not know that it's kind of continually loading 25 results in underneath, unless you're really, really fast, and then you'll see like a loading spinner, which we'll get to first. So I'm just going to put in these properties just quickly now, and I'll explain a little bit more in a sec. So again, strong type in, I can import things. So if I scroll to the top now, I've imported this movie. So if I undo that just to show it. So that's it there. I want to use the movie class, but it's not there because it's intelligent enough to know that it's there. I can just import it, and that is sorted. Just a sec. Dog's chewing his toy. I can't hear him. Right, so these are just all the initial variables that we need at the top. Page is just going to hold the current page. Current page has max. So this is just going to be, so every time we hit the API, we're going, give us 20, give us the next page, next page, next page, next page. We know there's 25 results in each page. So as soon as we get to a page where there's less than 25 results, we know we've reached the end. So as soon as we get to that situation, that is going to be set to true, and then we know not to load anymore. I can't remember if I got that far, so we don't get to that bit. That'll be fine. I'll put it on the upload. Is loading. I can't remember why we needed that. Yes. So I've got an is loading because when I was actually working on it, it was kind of loading the list twice, which I'll show you in a second. I'll explain why. List of movies, empty list of movies that we're going to populate as we load them. Scroll control, I'll come back to in a minute. Scroll threshold. That's basically it's not pixels, it's points or whatever the device independent pixels. So that all we're saying is we're going to use that threshold to the bottom. So that's the threshold. When we get to the scrolling position of 200 pixels from the bottom, 200 points from the bottom, then it's going to call the function, which we'll get in a second. Now, like I say, with Flutter, this is the stateful widget, as in it reacts to state changes. So we need to initialize any state. So if we're in it, and again, type in, we'll get all that. And then the next one is we need to overload, destroy, so dispose. So I'll explain this a little bit. So because we're using a stateful widget, you have to take care of the state yourself, which I'll just bring this next little bit in. So the scroll control is something we're going to use on the scroll widget just to see how far down the list we're getting. But because the scroll controller has its own state, it needs to be garbage collected. So once you finish using it, you need to dispose of it. Otherwise, you'll use up memory and getting all sorts of potential issues later on. So because we're using a stateful widget, we're taking responsibility for the state of the application, and that includes disposing of state and initiating state as well. And all this init state does, and this is it's taken from a higher class. I'm not going to go into that, but all it's doing is it's just doing its own state and then telling the state that it's the widget that it's extending from just to implement its state through Super. Any software development knowledge, you know, so I'm not going to go into that. Right, so what we're going to do is do the load movie logic, which I'm not typing up by hand, no shame, and me just copying this over and then I'll explain it. Otherwise, we'll be here forever. Right, so that's fine. Just going to import a couple of things here. JSON. I'll explain what I'm importing in a second, just because I'm using a couple of external libraries. I'm just bringing in a couple of external libraries. This one is an HTTP library just for doing GET requests and POST requests. If you go on Google and just type in Flutter packages, there's loads. It's just the Google style search, and you can search for, like I say, insert the widget name that you're looking for. There's one we used recently on one of the apps we're currently working on is like a Facebook like style reaction button. Rather than building that from scratch, there's a plugin for it, so you use it. Obviously, if you can't find a plugin, then you'd have to decide whether you're going to build it or not, or just compromise and not use it. So yeah, so all we're doing is bringing in a couple of things. This .env is just an environment variable, so I can put the API key in, so I don't have to tell you all that. And then, yeah, that's the only other thing that's being pulled in this HTTP library, which we're going to make the HTTP requests here. So this looks like it's all fine. So I'll explain what is happening here in just a sec. So if I go on the init state, now just one comment. This again, if you're from any other languages like C or Java, this is just this. It means the thing that you're in. But in Dart, it doesn't. It's not mandated. You don't have to do it, but I like doing it. And the reason being is that it's more explicit, so you know that you're calling this load movies. I just prefer it, and I tend to use it where I can. So just to sort of go over what's here so far. So just to find a couple of top level variables, as you would do with anything, your variables go at the top. Everything that gets defined at the top that you're going to be using. So we've got the page, the current page we're going to be on. If we reach the max, is loading. Blank movies, controller, which we'll get to in a second, and then load threshold. As soon as the application loads, it's init state because it's a stateful widget. This is going to be the first method that gets called on this widget, and it'll be called every time there's a significant state change. So as soon as that application loads up, we're going to initialize the controller. You could think of this like a constructor class. Again, if you're coming from any of our disciplines, although you can have a constructor, I think so this is a constructor, yeah. But so this is just a function that immediately gets called when the application starts to initialize its state, as it says. And the first thing we're going to do when it loads is to call this function to load the movies. And like I mentioned before, put this is loading false, because initially we're not loading anything. As soon as we start loading, we're going to set it to true, and then we're going to call out to the API. So if the page is 0, then it's going to be 1, and this could probably be done a little bit better. But so initially the page is on 0. The first page we're going to load is the first page, so it's going to load page 1, 25 pages at 1, and then the URL that's the URL, which is from the documentation. The documentation is really good for this API endpoint as well. So all that's going to do is it's going to pull me key for the API out, stick it in there, and then the page that we're on, first page will be page 1. It's going to call out to the API. It's going to get the result, and then it's going to use that magic in, where is it? In here. So this looks like a bit of a complicated line if you've not used anything like this before, but all it's basically doing is the data that's coming back from the API is all of this. So this is essentially what's going to be captured in that data property. Now we need to get that from text to JSON, then to the model. And this is where that cool stuff that we got from doing that, the generator, all of the logic for that is completely hidden away. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to write it. It's copy and pasted, easy. So basically what it's going to do is it's going to take the results property from here, and then it's going to loop over all of them or map all of those results into here. I'll dive into it just a little bit. So all it's going to do is it's for each property that gets passed into here, it's going to create a movie class or movie instance and assign all of the JSON properties to the equivalent properties on the class. That's it. But you don't need to worry about it. As long as all that stuff's generated fine, it's there, it's hidden, it's gone. Don't need to worry about it. And then again, like I mentioned before, if we didn't use set state, this wouldn't update. just wouldn't work. It would look like it's working fine, but then you would have nothing in your list. And again, this could probably be done a little bit better, but all I'm doing is it's an empty array initially. So it's going to load in the first 25. It's going to add all of those 25 into that movies array. And then I'm going to get my first list of 25. And then when I get to the bottom, that threshold at the bottom, it's going to go, right, get us page 2. I'm going to get another 25 results. And then I'm going to add all of those to the bottom. And then, like I say, as long as the user's not scrolling too fast, it'll just look like a continuously loading list, because it is. So that's the logic for doing the load. Now, again, this is not how you write it. This would be for a basic simple app. Maybe it's okay to put business logic in here. But the idea with Flutter, if you're building a big app, is to take your business logic and, like one of the guys said before, is split it out and put it into a block. So your data is completely separate to the UI, but again, check out some tutorials and stuff. It'll go into much greater depth. But for now, this is a small thing, so it's all good. The other thing we need to do is we need to do this on scroll listener. So we need to basically do something with the on scroll event. So again, if you're coming from a web dev background, this would be the equivalent of doing a window watch or something like that. You're watching the window, intercepting the user scroll, and then applying some business logic for doing a thing like an action or whatever. And in our case, we're taking this, we're going to attach a listener on the initialization. So that's essentially the first bit mainly done. So all we're doing is creating a new scroll controller, attaching a listener. Again, that would be for web development, window.listen, window resize, or window scroll, or whatever. We're initially going to load the first 25 results, which will fill the screen with 25 results. And then we're then going to listen to any on-scroll events, vertical scroll events. And we're going to get the max extent, which is essentially, it's just getting the screen size. So we're taking the full screen size, and then the current scroll position will be how much the user scrolled down the page already. And then just a little bit of comparison to see where they are versus where we've set that little sort of breakpoint there, which is probably going to be what, around maybe, I don't know, somewhere there. So as soon as the scroll gets to that point there, then it's going to hit that condition, and then it's going to load more movies. So that's pretty much the business logic for doing it. And now we'll start with the UI. So we'll need to get rid of this. This now needs to be a scroll view. So I'm going to do a custom scroll view. Again, I'm not going to explain any of what these are, just because I haven't got long enough. So we want a scroll view, which is just basically a list, a scrollable list. And then again, because this is type hinting, the way you do this in Android Studio, I'm on a Mac, so it's control space. On Windows, it's I think it's control space as well. Yeah, I think it's control space. So all I can do is when you're inside any widget, you can just do the type hinting and see what things you're going to be setting. So I know that we're going to be using this, and slivers are just, you can have like multiple lists in lists, and slivers allow you to have lists within lists and manage things properly, and Flutter takes care of it. Really cool functionality. I'm kind of not using it with its full extent on this, but it's enough for this. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a title in on the page. We've got rid of the app bar title because I don't really like that style, and we're going to have a custom title. Hopefully this just reloads. There we go. So I might have to do a hot reload, but that gets the movie list in there. Now, step one, rather than going straight in and doing the full UI and kind of listing everything out, I'll show you how I would normally start something like this. So normally, right before even going into doing the model and doing the API stuff, essentially when you're building a Flutter app, the really cool thing you can do, which it helps with, is being able to just do just mock things up and just build things as you go. Or if you're coming from doing some wireframing, Flutter's really good to do quick wireframing in the sense that you don't necessarily need to have the data. You can just mock up the data and sort of pretend things are there and sort of generate lists of 10 or 15 items and get an idea for how you're going to style things. So the way I started doing this one was I knew I was going to need a grid list. So we're going to do a vertical grid list with 2 columns. So just to get an idea of the proportions on the screen, and I'll explain what's going on with this in a sec. Yeah, so basically this is just another widget. Again, everything's a widget, widgets and widgets. We're doing the pattern. So again, if this was CSS for web development, you'd be doing a separate style sheet. You'd having to go off and jump and do a selector in CSS. Or if you were using Android, you're going to be jumping between doing XML and jumping between code and all of that. Just Android development, just so much additional boilerplate verbose code. It's nuts. Flutter, everything's a widget and everything's a property. The styling properties sort of in with the widget. And you can't just put random stuff in again because it's hyphented. There's things that it expects you to put in, and that's it. You just put those in. So all we're doing is we're giving just the horizontal and vertical pattern just to match the top. And then this looks complicated, but it's kind of not. So we've got a grid widget, which is just basically everything that surrounds those tiles. And then we've got a delegate, which is just, again, I'll not go into that. We're giving it an aspect ratio of 4:3, which gives us this proportions. We're telling it we want it to be a cross-axis count of 2, and we're just sorting out the spacings. Again, with the reactiveness, if you want to experiment with it, you're not having to wait for a full rebuild. If you want it to say, well, actually, let's see how it looks with 3. And again, just immediate, no rebuild, just it's immediately there. Or maybe you just want to do 2, or you kind of want to just sort of loosen up the spacing on these a little bit. Again, super quick, and going back to the point I mentioned before about the speed of development. Imagine doing this natively. There's just so many extra steps, and all you want is something beautiful on the screen that looks awesome. And with Flutter, it's just so quick to get there. Yeah, it is what it is. So that's kind of just the things that we're flying just for the top of there. Now this delegate is essentially just saying for every item that we're going to generate in this list, this is the markup for that particular thing. And as you can see, yeah, just as a test, I'm generating 10 items. This could be 2, and it's going to update. This could be 4. It's going to update all the responsiveness. And if we do 100, really responsive. And the way Flutter works, as long as you're using list views, is the same with like you would have with like an Android or an iOS. It manages that list. So it's not actually rendering 100 items. It's only rendering like what's in the sort of in the actual view minus a couple and plus a couple on the bottom. Which is how it keeps its performance. But again, the only thing you'll notice if you're doing local development, which is why I've decided to put it on the phone, is that it's a bit sluggish when you're using the emulators and stuff, and it's not great. So that's the starting point. This was when I was deciding what to do. This was kind of right. I knew I was going to need 2 columns, and we'll kind of have that aspect ratio because we've got the images to pull in and show over the top of it. So that was kind of step 1 and kind of getting an idea for the layout. So with that being said, we'll get rid of step 1. And then we'll move on to something a little bit more involved. So what I'll do now is I'm going to put on the loading spinner. So this is the first thing you'll see when you go to the application and there's no date, there's no movies loaded. And also if you manage to scroll all the way to the bottom before the app's had time to load the new data in, you'll see this little spinner on the bottom as well. So I'll just pop this in here. So if I just hit save, this is going to give her a little spinner. So load an icon. And then if we just pull in the next bit. So all this is doing, and yeah, this is inline conditions. So all we're saying is, has the max been reached? If it has, then we just want to show an empty box. So this is just Flutter's nice little shorthand for doing a box with 0 height and 0 size. If the max hasn't reached, then we're either loading data or the data needs to be loaded, in which case we need to show that little spinner. And this is the next bit. Just be a sec. I might have to do a full reload on this because there's quite a lot of changes on here. So just before I save, I'll just quickly go over this. Just bring in one extra thing. So again, just to save time, I've built this little widget. So Flutter has its own widgets, and you can build your own widget. So rather than repeating yourself over and over again, following dry programming principles, do not repeat yourself, then I've created a widget that I'm going to use to display an image. And there's this really cool plugin from Flutter called Network Image. And all it does is while you're loading an image and there's a request for an image going on in the background, you can be running, you can just show like an image in place of it while it's loading. And again, I'm not going to go over this because it's just boring, but it's just a network image. It's going to get an image that you pass a URL in. It'll show a placeholder while it's loading, and it'll show an error if it wasn't able to find the image. And I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to try and speed things up a little bit. So now if we go back to the main, I can import this because of typing. So again, it's pretty much the same thing as before. We've got the grid, the 2-axis count, the aspect ratio, the padding, and the margins. The only thing that's different this time is because we're dealing with movies now, we're going to pull in the list of movies. So we're basically telling the grid that you have a count of the length of movies, which makes sense. If the movie length is 25, we want 25 grid items. If it's 50, we want 50 grid items. So that's going to determine the length of the grid and how many things are rendered. And then this delegate is the bit that decides what's going to be rendered. So in our case, instead of having a card and just the random colors, this time it's going to be a card with an image. So I'm now going to save this and hopefully it'll just refresh and I won't have to reload anything. Let's see. So rebuilding. To be honest, I'm surprised it's got this far without crashing, so I consider this a win. Right, so we'll just do a full rebuild just to get. Yeah, so I guess questions while this is, I don't know. I think I might have reloaded it unnecessarily. So that's nearly it. There's one of that small bit that I added on as well. So we'll just scroll through this. So all this is doing is exactly what it was before, but instead of loading in those placeholder colors, we now have images, and that is basically pulled in from this. And when we get to the end, I'll show you, maybe show you the debugging just to so you can see it. So essentially all that's doing is it's looping over each of the items listed in the item count in here. And then this delegate is basically going over each item in that list. And then it's pulling the movie by its index and then showing the full poster path there. And then, again, I don't want to do too much because I don't know how much time I had. So that's cool, a little bit boring. So say we want to introduce like another element to it. If I just pop, say, I think in the API, it gives you access to vote count, I think it is, or voter average. So I've just taken that, putting this in as an extra little widget, which will put the percentages up top. Again, super responsive. So all this is doing, just quickly before we kind of start looking to wrap up, is it's a stack widget, just lets you stack things on top of each other. So web development, that would be the equivalent of doing a div with an absolutely positioned item inside of it. The stack lets you do things absolutely positioned and like overlay them. And it works in order of you adding them. As you can see, this is overlaying that because it was added next. So we scroll down and you'll see that you'll get a combination of, if we hit it, the loader at the bottom, and then these will just progressively load in the images using that, the content image. So initially you'll see, actually I'll change the color just so you can see it. Placeholder, let's say blue, 500. So the way the colors work is just on a scale of 100 through to 900. It's well documented. So if I do that, and then if I scroll down, we should hopefully see a blue placeholder, and then the image get loaded over the top of it. Yeah, so I've got the loader at the bottom. Is it going to load anymore? No. Should have refreshed. So yeah, that's about it. I think it went all right. I thought it was not going to work, so yeah, I think that's about it. So I welcome any questions. Hopefully that was useful and you haven't zoned out.
Don't think we've got any last minute questions there. Oh, a couple last minute.
I hope it was useful because it's always a pain trying to do live coding because it either goes wrong or it's boring.
Well, it sounds like everybody enjoyed it. Sounds like it went down well. But yeah, that was a really great presentation, Adam. Thank you so much. And obviously, thank you so much to everybody that tuned in and for your questions. It was really great. So I know you mentioned that you wanted everybody to have the link, and yes, I have recorded this as well. So what I'll do is I'll send out to everybody. I've got everybody's emails, and I've got you all on sort of LinkedIn as well. So I can post. You probably either get an email or I'll post it on LinkedIn as well. So keep an eye out for that, everyone. And like I said, I know most of you from LinkedIn. So if you want to sort of keep up to date on the job market as well, feel free to drop me a message. But yeah, really great presentation, Adam. Thank you so much. You'll have to pop down for a beer to celebrate.
I'll like I say, I'll get the link out tomorrow. I don't know if I'll just pass it to you. But the one that I upload, I'll put it there's another page, like the details page. So there's a click through, and then that'll give you like a decent enough the functionality and stuff when you click through things. And like closing thoughts, Flutter animations are amazing on it as well. So doing hero animations, so doing where you click on this and then sort of animate that image onto the next page, just all that it's like 5 minutes worth of coding to do it. I definitely encourage it, and I hope this has been, my ramblings have been encouraging enough to jump in it, but definitely do it. If you've got any web development experience, like there's no mess around with Flutter. It's great. Yeah, I'll upload the code to GitHub. I'll do it sometime tomorrow, probably the back end of the day tomorrow, and I'll pass it